Several years ago, a group of us from ERUCC went on a Holy Land tour, visiting Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. And one of our adventures was to drive up the summit of the famous Mount Nebo. It's stark, it's rocky, it has a dramatic overlook toward Israel. And of course, there's a sign there pointing to the exact spot where Moses would have stood gazing out across the valley to the Promised Land. And one of the joys of tourism in the Holy Lands is that you take your skeptical eyes and your hearts of faith and you try to let them be in tension with each other. Our guide Johnny often told us on that trip, when he would point out such an exact spot, that you believe what you want. And he would recite the state touristic spiel. But what we have to say is that it's a magnificent sight. And standing there, our skeptical eyes and our hearts of faith were before us as we looked at that vast panorama. In our lesson from Deuteronomy today, we are standing with Moses on Mount Nebo, looking out into the Promised Land. He probably would have been happier to take the tourist bus rather than climb that craggy mountain. But there he is at the summit at last. Finally, we're here. And God speaks to Moses once more. This is the land which I swore to your ancestors. You can see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over. The text says that Moses was 120 years old, but his sight was unimpaired and he still had vigor. I wonder what Moses was thinking. I wonder if Moses was like, "Are you serious, God? After all of this?" I wonder if he wanted to recite to God this remarkable life he's had, looking back as well as looking at that land ahead, but remembering this incredible journey of his life, from being rescued by the daughter of the Pharaoh and raised in privilege in the Pharaoh's home, and then being called by God out of a burning bush to lead the Hebrew people from slavery to freedom. I wonder if he was remembering those 40 years in the desert with the people complaining about their hunger, their thirst, their fear, and their anxiety. I wonder if he was remembering the awe of what it was like to receive the 10 Commandments. I wonder if as Moses stood on the mountain, if he had a sense of peace and fulfillment. He had accomplished what God had asked him to do. It wasn't easy leading the people from slavery to freedom. His life was filled with all of these challenges of encouraging the people to look beyond their immediate needs to something bigger than themselves, a different kind of future. He often had to put his own discouragement and frustration aside to be faithful to the call that God gave him so many years ago. I have a hunch that many of us know what it's like to work really hard on a project and not see it realized in our lifetime. Perhaps we've worked so long and hard, and the end may even be in sight, but for whatever reason, we have to let go and let someone else take it on. I have a feeling that one of the reasons why people got annoyed with Moses was that he kept reminding them of what it meant to be a community, of how to treat one another, and reminding them to keep their heart and eyes on something bigger than just themselves. Moses saw things as they are. They were not tourists in the desert. They were pilgrims on a mission, on a journey, inspired and sent by God. I wonder what he was thinking as he stood on that mountain. Because Moses also did something else before he died. He prepared others for leadership. He prepared others and gave his blessing to the next generation. He showed them the destination, and he inspired them to go on even without him. And what's interesting is he doesn't leave a playbook for them. He trusts that God will lead them, and they will follow that leading. Today on the church calendar, we mark Reformation Sunday. It's a time when we remember those who have gone before us to remind us of what it means to be a pilgrim people called the church. It's a day when we remember that we are always a reformed and reforming church, always examining our practices and the ways we live in community and being faithful to God. We know that the reformers who have gone before us and leaders in this congregation who have gone before us often annoyed people when they asked us to be faithful. We know that some of those reformers, not in our church, but in previous times, even gave their lives because they felt so strongly about the authenticity and the integrity of the biblical message. I think it's one of the reasons why people got annoyed with Jesus, as we heard today. Certain people in power and authority got annoyed with him, so annoyed and so fearful that they sent him to his death. But Jesus just kept reminding people of what the Torah said, what their roots were. Their roots with the God who created them. Their roots with the one who told them that the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart and soul and your neighbor. And your neighbor. In this 275th anniversary year pre-COVID, we had planned to highlight these faithful persons from our church. On this Reformation Sunday and next Sunday, All Saints, we had hoped to invoke their memories, their faithfulness, the trust that they gave by passing on a legacy to us, coming after them. And while we're not able to have the big public celebration today and next week, I don't think we should let these days go by without acknowledging some of those who have gone before us. We cannot forget those early settlers who gathered here in the mid-1700s and built a log structure behind what we know now as Trinity Chapel. We cannot forget our founder, John Thomas Schley, who as a layperson, as a teacher, led the congregation in worship for years, and who taught children how to read the Bible and provided an education for the children of our founders. We cannot forget that set a course for our congregation who have seen education as critical for all the generations ever since. We cannot forget those who met in the basement of this building to found Hood College because those men believed that women deserved and were entitled to an equal liberal arts education as the men who were receiving that at Ursinus and Franklin and Marshall. We cannot forget the pastors of this church who helped to found and served with Lancaster Theological Seminary, and for the legacy of support for clergy and lay leaders to be educated and grounded in a strong theological background. And our congregation has several scholarships for faculty and for students at the seminary that we established years ago in order to continue that legacy. We cannot forget those who faithfully raised funds and contributed their hard-earned money for people they did not even know in mission around the world. I find it fascinating that in the midst of our civil war here in our country, this church gave money for what was called the Syrian mission in the Middle East. That's really incredible when you think about it. And in the early 1900s, we supported those missionaries, those first missionaries that went off to Japan. And we continue the support of that mission to this day. We cannot forget those who overcame their fear and anxiety about money to build Trinity Chapel, Kemp Hall, this sanctuary, and our new building, knowing that these buildings weren't just going to serve the congregation, but would serve as community gathering places for social justice work, for meetings, for community groups, and a healing place, as a place where those wounded in the Battle of Antietam could recover, and also a place for those who are finding respite from addiction and those who need shelter. Our ancestors, those who have gone before us, thought of this as part of our mission and legacy. And I want us to remember, too, all those who have gone before us and spoke up and stood up for justice, even when those issues were unpopular, even when people threatened to leave the church if we supported love, if we supported the poor, if we supported immigration. We must never forget these lives and the sacrifice that so many have made so that you and I can be here today. And we cannot forget that each and every generation must discover anew what it means to embody the love of God and the love of neighbor. For these past 4 weeks, we've been celebrating how each one of us is a face of love. And we've had members of our church, and soon we'll have Felicia up here, who have come forward and shared with us their stories, how they've experienced God, the face of God, in the members of our church and in the work that we do. Today we're making a commitment with our pledges for financial support. And I think it's significant that we're consecrating or blessing these gifts on Reformation Sunday, because it's important that we remember that these gifts help this church be a vehicle for God's face of love in all parts of the globe. And what we've written on our pledge cards is about us. It's about our commitment. It's about our faith. But it's also about our hope that our church will continue to find ways to bring good news in each and every generation. We release those gifts when we place them in the plate. We release them to God and to trusted people to carry out our mission so that we can continue to be a presence and face of love now and in the future. What I remember standing up there at Mount Nebo was how faith is never easy and it's never completed. There is always more to do, more people to love, more injustices to challenge. From Mount Nebo, I had the powerful sense of what it means to be a pilgrim on the journey. I had a sense of what it was for me to do my part and walk a portion of the faith journey and strive to be faithful in my calling and in all of our callings. I had the sense that there are days where I need to pray to God and release so that another generation can take it on. I was reminded at Mount Nebo again that it wasn't all about Moses, and it's not all about me or you. It's about what we can do together as a community, celebrating the gifts that each one of us brings to this endeavor. And know that we travel not by a tour bus, not as tourists, but as pilgrims. Pilgrims with the enduring grace of God. Amen.